Hey, everybody. I'm seeing a lot of people starting to flood in. Thanks so much for coming to this webinar hosted by Renoster. And we've got some great speakers today from Open Forest Protocol as well as Green Horizon. And just to give everybody a quick lay of the land, Mary will be moderating for us, and she's going to start off with an introduction of the review that Renoster recently did of OFP's methodology. Some of you may or may not have kind of read through that review, but we're going to give an overview of it and then kind of go through some various discussion points in a panel format. And then we'll open it up to some Q&A. A lot of you gave us excellent questions in your registrant form, and so we've done our best to sprinkle those in, and we're really excited that you've brought those to the table. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mary, our moderator.
Great, thanks, Catherine. I hope that everybody can hear me okay. So Elias and I spent a month this summer reviewing OFP's ARR methodology this summer, and we saw a lot of exciting things, innovations that we think could vastly improve carbon markets in a number of ways, especially around integrity. We also got a lot of viewer questions about how these innovations will improve specifically on existing methodologies. So that's where we're going to focus our discussion today. Elias and I will also be bringing up questions and recommendations that we had for OFP from our review. And so we'll just go ahead and jump right in because we have a lot that we could cover, and we only have, a few minutes here before we got to jump into the Q&A. So for brief intros, I'll just kick us off. My name is Mary Ignatiadis. I'm the forest carbon policy and economics expert at Renoster. I've been with the company for about a year, and I've had previous experience in forest carbon and timber asset management previous to this. So I'll kick it over to Elias.
Hi. My name's Elias. So my background's in forest science. I have a PhD in forest science, and I am Chief Science Officer here at Renoster. And so we do a lot of the diligence and review work for the most part. Jeremy, do you want to go next?
Sure, happy to. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Jeremy Epstein. My role at Open Forest Protocol is Head of Growth. I've got a background in carbon markets, business development, climate finance. My role here really is helping to grow the protocol through awareness, through participation, both on the buy side and the project development side. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to this webinar. Arlene?
Yes, so I'm Arlene. I'm one of the co-founders of Open Forest Protocol and also the Chief Climate Officer. I'm an environmental engineer by training. I'm based in Switzerland and been with OFP since the very beginning, which is about 4 years. And hi, everybody. Very nice meeting you all today. And Robert, I guess you can go.
Yes, I'll be the last one. So yeah, Robert van Doorn. I'm a founder of Green Horizon. We develop projects, reforestation projects throughout Africa. And we've started off our adventure with Tanzania. And with that, we also work closely with Open Forest Protocol. Glad you all could join.
And Robert, we'll keep things rolling with you because obviously one of the huge benefits of this ARR methodology is that it is intended for really, smaller scale project developers like yourself. And we have a lot of project developers in the audience. So we were hoping that you could give us some perspective on what it's like to actually use OFP's methodology. So as a project developer, why did you decide to work with OFP and with this methodology in particular?
Yeah, excellent question. That for us, as soon as we actually found OFP, that the choice became really rather simple. Because we have absolutely taken a look at more, call it the legacy systems. Think of your Veras, your gold standards, and so on, and they all have beautiful products. Main item that also allowed OFP to stand out is really its more cost-effective structure. So with these legacy systems, you could easily be looking at $50,000 for just registration alone. And that, for example, for us, we had a pilot project of about 12 hectares and planting a bit less than 20,000 trees. $50,000 just to register a project. That's already more than the entire investment that we've had in the project itself. So that for us didn't make much sense. And these kind of fees are basically non-existent with OFP. They work with a vastly different model that takes a percentage of the revenues. But that's not to me to explain a bit more about. And the other one is also sizing. For example, a pilot like ours of 12 hectares. that is something that really is not possible to do with Vera projects, because you need this substantial critical mass. You need, for example, at least a few thousand hectares for it to make sense. And for us, yeah, we were just starting in this world of reforestation. So we want to start off with a small pilot to see how it works. And we wanted to test with a variety of different tree species, predominantly native. And with OFP, yeah, it absolutely caters to the smallholder farms or much smaller holding sizes. And so that made it very easy for us to start off with this, and also makes it very simple for us to scale up to larger project sizes. Yeah, and here I see Jeremy's pulling up the atlas, and yeah, that actually goes to my second or my next point as to how my experience is with working with OFP. It's incredibly user friendly. It's incredibly intuitive, and yeah, the main thing is very important. It's very transparent, and because of its blockchain technology, is really tamper proof. So it's locked in. It can't be meddled with. And what you see is what you get, and we are able to really upload quite a variety of different data points, which keeps tracks of the growth. Yeah, we, for example, as you showed, implement tree photos, tree tags, yeah, and it all feels incredibly secure, very thorough, and I think it's an incredible reflection of also the thoroughness of the methodology that they have developed. Which yeah can only be further validated and confirmed by Renoster. And so yeah, it's very efficient, very scalable, caters to smallholder projects if they want to scale it up. It also works incredibly cost effective, transparent, and because of all that put together, yeah, the credits that they then develop are really of high integrity and really high quality, yeah, which translates to a high perceived value, but also a really a very attractive financial value, which yeah, in total makes it very attractive for us as starting project developers to yeah to really start to get the ball rolling and get these projects off the ground.
Social funding. So we'll go to Arlene, because Arlene is the Chief Science Officer. This must have been some of what you had in mind developing this protocol. What, we've heard what's really exciting from a business side, access to financing, lower fees, that sort of thing. From a scientific side, from an integrity side, what are you really excited about in this protocol? Oh, I believe you are on mute.
Oops, yes, sorry. Yeah, so I was just saying, like, if we look at what the markets are expected to be, like in 10 years from now, so you're probably reaching a 10 or 100 billion market, and we need a lot of quality supply to match basically the demand. So like as an engineer, you're like trained to identify problems and find solutions. And so what we really did here is like, okay, how can we scale the supply of the carbon credits in the nature-based space in a way that is like really inclusive? Because we had a lot of like parties that were excluded from this market, and typically, as Robert was saying, like smaller size projects are really like not included in the legacy systems. So this was really key. We wanted a solution, like a technical solution, a very efficient solution for small, medium-sized projects. And I also worked on a nonprofit organization that was like supporting sustainable reforestation projects. And we saw that what was really also difficult for these projects was the reporting, because they're focused on like planting trees, restoring ecosystems, and reporting is not very often like their center of interest. And so what we wanted to do is develop a technology that was making it very easy for projects of any size all over the world to be able to report very transparently what they were doing. And this also leads to increased financing, because investors can see the direct impact, the measurements of the trees on the ground. And it's extremely important. So yeah, as a scientist, I really like value the impact that we see on the ground and finding solutions that are extremely easy to use for people that are involved in these kinds of projects. And I think the last point is really the conflict of interests that exists in the current market, that kind of reduces the trust that we should have in carbon projects. And so OFP really has some innovation here, and we can talk about it later on with this decentralized validation system, which is extremely interesting to remove all like conflicts of interest in the validation of these projects. So overall, yeah, I think these would be the main points that really like are of great interest to me and that we really focused on when they're developing OFP.
Great. And Elias, I know when we were reviewing the methodology, there were several things about this reporting mechanism that really stood out to us as differing from existing methodologies. Would you like to kind of give an overview of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the methodology itself has some of the most stringent ARR requirements that we've come across in the market. You know, these include things like the trees, you know, it must be native species unless like, there's very specific exceptions for like food-bearing trees and soil regeneration. Notably, most ARR projects are not necessarily native species. They can't plant monocultures. So I think there's a requirement of 3 to 5 species, depending, like circumstantially dependent. You know, they're not allowed to cut down rainforest and then immediately replant trees. And this is quite important because we don't want to subsidize that behavior. There's, you know, the contract lengths are longer than what we often see on the market. And, you know, I think that the data is much more transparent and easy to follow. So like there's real measurements of trees that are being shared publicly and whatnot. And it's worth pointing out that pretty much all of these things are missing from most other protocols, right? Abacus, you know, lets you cut down native rainforest and replant trees. Abacus has forbids monocultures, but at the same time, like the actual plantation requirements are pretty lenient. And so these are really best in class practices here. There was another one here that I thought we could touch on, which was projects can't harvest their trees. And this is really kind of a double-edged sword, and it also kind of touches on like the core challenges that we see in the ARR market right now. Most of what we see on the ARR market is timber plantations being planted by timber companies. And we don't think those are additional. We think that those timber companies were going to plant those trees anyway. And we think that a lot of these credits are just subsidizing big ag. And so by forbidding forest harvest on you know, these sites, Open Forest Protocol is preventing that. And it's an ironclad case for additionality because there's no other reason to be planting these trees other than carbon. But you know, as a forest scientist, this one also kind of comes with some drawbacks. You know, we know that kind of best forest practices can sometimes involve the removal of trees. I think, you know, we can all think of instances in which like removing some trees for fire prevention would be good. There's kind of more complicated ecological reasoning as well. If you're planting trees in like a single even age stand and you want that stand to kind of regenerate into the future and you want biodiversity in the understory, it kind of helps to thin some trees out so that new ones can start to kind of come in and take their place. So and then, you know, obviously harvesting timber also allows for kind of long-term revenue for the small farmers on these sites. So it's a double-edged sword, but I can understand why that criteria is there. And I think maybe most importantly, for the moment, it kind of prevents these instances in which you know, timber companies are enrolling for carbon credits for their normal everyday operations, which is honestly, again, what we see in most of the ARR market. A majority of ARR projects that Renoster has reviewed, I think we've reviewed over 60 or 70 of them so far, are just timber plantations from timber companies. And it's really good that we're avoiding that. So that was kind of long-winded, but.
Elias, I do have a question here about allowing the cutting of tropical forests for ARR. When you say that other methodologies allow that, do you mean they just don't really have adequate mechanisms in place to prevent it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that other methodologies don't have any mechanisms to prevent, well, so it depends on the methodology, but Gold Standard and Vera both basically allow you to enroll carbon programs in which you've planted trees on areas that have recently been cut down. And this is really problematic for 2 reasons. The first is that it kind of quasi-incentivizes people to cut down native rainforest and then flip the land and plant trees. That's awful. And the other kind of bad reason is that a timber company could cut down last year's, you know, forest and then replant trees and get carbon credits. So, you know, Vera's VM47, Vera's Abacus, Gold Standard, they don't have this this criteria. Gold standard kind of quasi has this like criteria. You have to kind of demonstrate that what you're doing is better. But yeah, that's really an important component that's missing from some methodologies on the market today.
Okay. And I do want to clarify for some of our viewers that this methodology is not specific to RED Plus or any country, that it is meant to be applied globally. That's my understanding from reading the methodology. Is that kind of, Jeremy, Arlene, what you had in mind?
OFP built our methodology with a global context in mind, something that's open and accessible regardless of geographic location, project size, many other factors that were constricted or limited in legacy systems. That's right.
That's great. Let's see, scrolling down to the next question here. We do have some questions too about the blockchain technology, how it helps with data transparency. We've discussed that a number of times already at this point. The data is very transparent. How does using blockchain help with keeping the data transparent? Jeremy, I think you might be the one to take this first.
I'm happy to take that one. Although Arlene, feel free to weigh in as well. I mean, from a high level at Open Forest Protocol, as a new company doing MRV and ultimately creating a registry and a standard for issuing carbon credits, we took the standpoint of the legacy market has leaned into trust in the organizations issuing the credits, and maybe a little less so in trusting the assets that they issue. And I think that's gotten the VCM into some hot water, led to kind of a pullback, and I think it's limited the potential of the VCM. With Open Forest Protocol, the emphasis really has been on create an asset that is highly trusted. It's not so much about Open Forest Protocol. We're sort of the keepers and the creators, but we are, because of the use of blockchain, unable to tamper with or affect the creation of the assets. That all happens essentially through a third-party network that we've created and we maintained that does the validation. But for anyone on this webinar, whether you're a potential buyer, a project developer, you will be interacting with the blockchain. But I would say don't worry about that. Why? Because short answer is, if I can do it, you can do it. I'm certainly not a blockchain developer. I don't know how to code. I'm a limited but decently proficient tech guy. I've had no problem creating and keeping accounts that interact with OFP. We've got an admin account on the back end. It's the same login structure to access. It is essentially a very simple process. 99% of the time, interacting with Open Forest Protocol, you'd have no idea that there is a blockchain operating in the back end. Maybe at the account creation stage, you'd have to write down a secure passphrase. That would pretty much be it. Data upload, access to the account, carbon credit management, retirement, all that's very user-friendly, intuitive, with the added bonus of that blockchain record keeping, immutability, decentralized data file storage, all those things that help us create this system that's free of conflicts of interest and essentially a third party incorruptible that keeps the score for our projects. Ultimately, even the passphrase is something that we're working on abstracting to some degree. But I think we've managed, at least in the V1 that we're in, to create a very user-friendly, very intuitive system. And we haven't had really any issues with anybody not being able to use any aspect of it because of the blockchain or otherwise.
Great. Robert, I guess, could you attest to kind of the ease of use of the platform, how that's worked for you? Oh, I can't quite hear you.
You did.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, classic.
There we go.
No, I can absolutely confirm also, yeah, it also takes me back to what Jeremy said. Indeed, using that passphrase, I actually completely forgot that we had to do that in the first place, because it's indeed, you encounter a few things where it's like, oh, this seems a bit different, but you really wouldn't have any idea that but a blockchain is indeed operating into the back end, that it is involved in any whatsoever way. You actually have no idea. All in all, yeah, the whole dashboard that you use on your computer, or even the application on your phone, yeah, both are incredibly easy to use, and yeah, again, that blockchain is involved, yeah, you really can't tell, other than, yeah, it gives you a nice warm feeling to know that everything is very secure, tamper-proof, and very transparent.
There is a really good question in here about the blockchain, and that is, of course, the energy required for storage. Is OFP doing anything about that impact?
So we chose a blockchain that has really low energy consumption, and it's the Near protocol. So I think they estimated their CO2 emissions a while back, and it was like minimal. So it's definitely not the same consumption as Bitcoin. It's a different mechanism for the validation and the storage on the blockchain. So there's really like, it's extremely low. You could compare it to storing things on a server, on a centralized server, or probably even less. So it's really not energy intensive and CO2 emissions intensive either. And this, I think, yeah, something that we really need to emphasize, like, because everybody has been talking about like Bitcoin and the energy consumption of Bitcoin, but all the new blockchains are really more efficient in terms of energy consumption.
Near protocol, I believe, at least in 2022, used the equivalent of 18 European homes. That was their full carbon footprint, and I believe that included some Scope 3 emissions. So it is, as Arlene said, quite low. Bitcoin is a whole different animal. It is energy intensive. We're not interacting with it. It has very little, if nothing, to do with us.
Well, that's a really important innovation on the processing and tracking front. I'd like to redirect us back to some of the innovations for carbon market integrity in the methodology itself. We'll start, I guess, with the validation and verification process. So something that's really unique about this methodology is that there are multiple, what in a traditional methodology might be called a VVB, but in this case, you're calling them experts. Organizations that you approve that can go on and review projects' data and then, very transparently on their, review the projects on your platform. So some questions that I had around this is, first of all, if you could just give a brief explanation of how you envision your validation process working for the viewers, and then, discuss who the reviewers are. What does it take to be an expert reviewer on your platform?
Yeah. So happy to take this one. As Renoster pointed out in their review, I think it was one of the key points that they really honed in on, is that we've created a validation system that's free from conflicts of interest. And a part of that is the fact that we enable many individual entities to participate in the validation of a single project's data upload. So, for instance, those pictures that I had shown of Robert's project in Tanzania, the validators have access to that information, and they spend a period of time, they have up to 30 days to choose to do essentially a blind review of that data, looking for anomalies, in fact, having an incentive to look for anomalies and call out any reason why they believe, ultimately this project or this project data upload wouldn't be fit to create really high quality assets for the voluntary carbon market. And we truly believe that there's strength in diversity, and a diversity of organizations, skill sets, technologies, and even cultural viewpoints can contribute to a more holistic, more fair, more stringent validation to ensure that ultimately no credit is ever created on open forest protocol. Again, that isn't fit to, say, raise the bar of quality in the voluntary carbon market. So right now, that network of validators is made up of over 35 individual organizations. They comprise VVBs, so some of the same VVBs that are working with Vera, with Gold Standard, that are used to this process of reviewing data, looking for anomalies. We employ many remote sensing companies within that network. There are so many, if you've looked at sort of who's been raising in climate tech lately, there's a lot of remote sensing companies out there. We essentially provide a platform for them to come in and create revenue by doing a good job of reviewing and calling out bad projects, approving good projects. We have MRV companies, and I think this is a way of creating what I call like a super intelligence within the voluntary carbon market. We can really incorporate many organizations from, these small startup remote sensing companies all the way to, our dream would be NASA and the European Space Agency, right? But they're all welcome. As we grow this network, we grow our presence. We can begin to incorporate local communities as well that live in and around our projects, who can provide also on-the-ground perspectives and validations, because most of the validation that I've described thus far happens remotely. It's what I call an armchair validation. They look at the data provided through our platform, they compare that to the data that they have access to, that they have unique access to, and see, does A equate with B? But again, we have the ability to create these, what I would call like an economic halo effect, by saying, hey, local community that lives in and around this project or that project, you're going to be checking this data on a regular basis as well. And you have an incentive structure and the ability to create and generate revenue by doing a good job through that process as well. So this network can continue to grow. We ultimately hope to grow it into the numbers of hundreds. And I think we're well on our way to doing that.
Elias, I know you had a lot of opinions about.
I mean, this is one of my little like personal soapboxes here. I think the traditional voluntary carbon markets verification process is severely broken, and like that's the reason that we see projects with human rights violations get CCB and Vista stamps for quality and whatnot. The traditional market works by, there's a set of validators out there that are certified by registries to go around and sign off on these projects. And then developers who are creating these projects, they hire those validators and pay them to sign off on what they're doing. And this obviously has some real conflicts of interest here, because validators, they have an incentive to just sign off pretty easily because they're getting paid by the group that they're signing off on. And then, the project developers have an incentive to shop around until they find a validator who's really easy to, work with. And so it's just a race to the bottom.
But even, in my experience, a lot of VVBs are acting with integrity or trying to, but even so, even if that were the case, there's still a lot of advantages to having multiple validators.
Yes. So I was going to touch on that. I mean, I think this system really gets away from all of those conflicts of interest, because validators are assigned randomly and they're paid out of a different pool, like out of a global pool, rather than paid by the developer. But that's another nice thing, is that, VVBs right now are expected to be global experts in everything. They're expected to be global experts in Brazilian land tenure and legal law, as well as Indonesian land tenure and legal law. They're expected to be remote sensing experts. They're expected to be forest ecologists. They're expected to be, I guess, social scientists as well. And they can't do all that, right? No organization can necessarily do all that, and they haven't been, historically doing all of that. And the nice thing about this system is that, you're collecting a group of people who have different expertises. And so the remote sensing groups can work on the remote sensing elements, and those who are really good at social science and policy can work on the other elements, and they can all come together and bring their data together and vote. And that's a much more logical way than trying to find a single organization that is a global expert in all the different fields that span the carbon market. So somebody did leave us a question, like, how are 10 VVBs supposed to be able to take on this workload? Well, they're not necessarily, you can envision splitting this up amongst their expertise. So that's one of the things that also kind of excites me.
Yeah, which, to be clear, I think currently in the methodology, it is not assigned that each expert has to be an expert in one field. But that's something, Elias, that you are suggesting OFP maybe consider for the future.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
as we grow this network, just to respond, I mean, we've really started very global and very almost erring towards generalization within the first cohort of validators that we're onboarding. As it grows, we can add more specialists, even, say social scientists or validators that will act only within a very specific bioregion on the planet, right? Because that is their expertise. So that is sort of how this system intends to grow.
So we are getting questions too about how the VVB voting process works on the dashboard. And Elias, I think you worked through some examples of this too in our review. What if 9 of the 10 organizations reviewing the project agree, but one disagrees? How does that get worked out?
Well, it's a complicated process, so maybe I'll hand it off to Jeremy, because it's his. Or Arlene. I mean,
I'll take a quick stab at it. Arlene, feel free to add any color that makes sense here. So essentially, there's a 30-day window where everyone has the opportunity to choose to validate on a project. Let's say at the end of that 30-day period, you have 12 that say no and 3 that say yes. Okay, obviously there's differing opinions here. What we have is essentially a resolution period. That within that resolution period, the validators can then communicate with one another and say, well, here's why I said X, here's why I said Y. And again, going back to those diversity of viewpoints, you could have a company with a LiDAR data set that tells us something that the satellite companies and the VVBs just didn't have access to and couldn't see. And so maybe they have got a very, very good reason to come up with the answer that they did. They can share that with the group. And if it's compelling enough, the other validators can decide to change their mind. There is a game theory behind this where there is essentially like a poker game. The validators can choose to weight their decisions based on their confidence using a token incentive structure that we've built specifically for them. And that allows them to really express their confidence level in any given decision. After the end of that resolution period, really the vote with the most tokens weighted behind it will ultimately be the outcome. All of this data, the voting, ultimately the discussion between validators does become, again, it becomes saved on the blockchain, becomes public access, becomes something that you can read for any given project's individual validation. And that validation happens twice a year for the first 2 years, every single year thereafter. So there's many, many opportunities to review projects throughout a temporal scale. Arlene, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. Nothing to add.
I was just going to say that it sounds like if you were buying the credits, you wouldn't need to then go and pay a third-party reviewer to dig up all that information for you because you could just read through it on OFPs.
The theory is no, but the theory is also if you wanted to, it's all there. You don't have to call us up and say, hey, can you send us this PDD report? Can you send us this thing? It's yeah, all of the data is open source, open sandwich, right? So you can see the whole process and access that. So if you want to pay a third party to tell you if the credits are good or not good, whether you should buy them or not, it's all there in our atlas and open source.
And honestly, I think this this full transparency of the data, the validation results, and so on is also very important on the project side because it really incentivizes them to do a good job on the ground and a good job with the project. From the very start, they know that they need to do their very best and they can't really hide stuff. So that's also very interesting for us to be able to then get to quality projects and quality credits. Because with some like legacy system, you can even like hide the project location. Like you don't really know where the project is located. There's no like explicit KML in some cases. So here it's not possible. And like you can compare easily between projects. We have a kind of like Atlas Google Maps interface where you can like just like shop around and see what's happening on the ground and support the projects that are of your interest in your location or in a specific area or whatever. So I think, yeah, the transparency is really here to also enhance the quality on like the project side, but also the carbon credit side.
Great. We've gotten a lot of questions, and I'm quite glad that we've gotten these questions about social safeguards, FPIC. I think maybe it would be helpful to provide some context, and I'll just toss this out to the group. Some context around what sort of safeguards make sense for really small projects, like the type that would be using this methodology, because, you know, free, prior, and informed consent for a very small project where the landowner is, you know, the project proponent is going to look very different than if we're, you know, reforesting a huge plantation as a large company. So, you know, maybe Robert, you could kick us off with what it looked like for your project to have social safeguards, and Arlene and Jeremy and Elias just chime in with what you think is already covered in the methodology or what could be covered in the methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for us, we work together with a local landowner, which is actually also one of our partners for Green Horizon. So that actually made things, yeah, in terms of co-benefits rather easy. Also, yeah, in terms of social safeguards, yeah, there weren't many other populations in that area. So that's not necessarily something that we really needed to take into account for this particular project. For other projects that we're wanting to develop, that is absolutely more the case. There we're, for example, dealing with locally owned village land, and there the social safeguards are a very different story. And that actually, Tanzania specifically is also a bit of an interesting case study, because in certain aspects, especially when it comes to the regulation side of things, and which predominantly focus on sharing of co-benefits, but also social safeguards. Yeah, that is something that Tanzania is actually quite a front runner. So actually from the government and institutional side, yeah, that trickles down to our projects. So in terms of revenue sharing, yeah, that we actually have co-benefits and revenue sharing built in. But that's also predominantly and very specific to Tanzania. If you go to other African countries, for example, those are not yet in place. Though I would suspect that this is something that is actually going to happen in multiple countries and in multiple continents as well.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to this, like what we've seen with the projects that we've been evaluating, a lot of them are either like small size projects led by local communities or local organizations, and now they're getting bigger and bigger, of course. But a lot of them have like alternative livelihood programs directly embedded, because at the very core, they want to restore ecosystem in a very biodiverse way, which is not a timber plantation, and so it's very different. So they want to maximize the revenue streams, they want revenue from carbon, but they also want like some trees to keep also make sure that the trees stay in the ground because they can get fruits and food from the restoration project. Some of them also have like beehives because they want to get honey. So it's very much different from a timber project, I would say. Like there's a lot more activities that go in the project, like education and so on. And of course, on our side, we do check, like sometimes the landowner is the project developer, but sometimes it's not. They, of course, need to have a convention with the landowner to also like distribute the share of credits. And of course, like with time, we can also improve this on OFP, and we want to improve this, but the blockchain technology that we have is also able to trace the payments in the future. So basically, you could have a portion of the carbon credits that is like automatically assigned to a given person. And you can say, okay, I want, I don't know, 1% of the credits going back to this person, 1% going back to this other person, and it can be traced. So you have a way of really showing that the revenue is going to the local communities that are involved within the project area. So this is not yet available, but yeah, it's potentially something that we can develop in the future.
Yeah, on top of that fractionalization of payments, you know, I think Open Forest Protocol really expands what the definition of a typical project developer can be, right? Of course, we do work with commercial project developers, and in those cases, the free prior informed consent or the documentation amounting to that is really, really important. But also, we can enable, let's say, indigenous communities to own their own projects, right? No need for an intermediary, and we show, you know, there is a direct correlation or direct relationship between, you know, our account structure and that individual organization, such that they are directly receiving the credits. Ultimately, they own those credits to be able to sell, and we can show, as Arlene was saying, the direct on-chain payments made back to those communities as well. So it's a very flexible tool, again, being used in a commercial context, but also in a sort of more autonomous context where that's appropriate.
Yeah, I guess I would stress the benefits of small landowners as a social safeguard itself. It is the strongest social safeguard, because all of these issues where we have these projects that are, you know, falling to pieces and like communities are revolting and suing and stuff, those are taking place in situations in which tens of thousands of people are living in or around the project. These are taking place where, like, you know, the government is reforesting massive amounts of land around a community, or, you know, like these massive mega projects. But, you know, when you're working with an individual person, getting them to sign off and getting free prior informed consent is a lot easier than trying to get tens of thousands of people to actually like acknowledge what's going on and accept it. And I think beyond that, it has a stronger social impact because the money is going kind of more directly to the community, and it's not trying to be dispersed through like multiple government or multiple organizations to get to these tens of thousands of people. And then I think it has a stronger chance of success because that person who's planting the trees, they're a real stakeholder in this program. They really want the program to succeed. They really want the trees to survive. And that's pretty different than like having a whole community with 20,000 people where, you know, they've got some vague knowledge that trees are being planted by somebody, but like they don't really care. And so that itself kind of adds a lot of safety and safeguards to the program. And this is one of the reasons that we really like projects that kind of focus on these smaller kind of individuals. That nobody is better at protecting trees than that old farmer with the shotgun on his porch.
Although that can look like a lot of different things depending on where you are. Great. I'm cognizant that it's, 11:40 my time. We have 20 minutes left today. Are there any other innovations in the methodology that anyone was excited to discuss before we jump into the Q&A? All right. I think we've covered anything. We do have a great question specific to the methodology around leakage quantification. For folks who haven't dived into the methodology yet, Elias, what did you think about the leakage quantification in OFP's methodology?
I mean, it's one of the more simplistic out there. I think it's less of an issue, again, because it's small farmers. Like, we're not talking about reforesting vast swaths of land where, like, whatever land use in that 10,000 hectares is being offset somewhere. And so I don't worry quite as much with small farmers because when you just reforest like 10 hectares or some smaller area, there's an elasticity. There's an economic term called elasticity. And so when you have a very small impact on a community or on a supply chain, that's not enough of an impact to really cause any shock or cause much of a displacement. So it doesn't worry me quite as much. Nevertheless, there is leakage deductions being done. I'll let Jeremy and Arlene explain them.
Yes, definitely. So as Elias was saying, and often it can be very challenging to really measure leakage efficiently. So there are some methodologies that are available, but honestly, the stance that we took on our side is that it's complex. It's extremely complex to get an accurate measurement of leakage. And if you check most of the projects that are around, they find a way to say that leakage is zero and to justify it. So on there are very little projects that have an actual leakage. And what we found out was most of the projects that actually have leakage have probably a leakage of 3% or something like this, very minimal. So the choice that we did is that if the project is able to prove that there's absolutely no leakage that will happen, and this honestly, in some of the projects that we have, we can definitely see that there's no leakage that will be happening. There can if the project is happening on fully degraded land that was absolutely not used and that is now going to be restored and so on, the leakage is very minimal or practically inexistent. And if we evaluate that leakage can happen or that there's a risk, then we set the leakage at 5% for the moment. So that's the choice that we did. And of course, the methodology is flexible. We can improve it over time. And for larger project, as Elias was saying, there's an evaluation of leakage that is pretty much similar to what is being done with the Vera project. So it deep dives more into what is the actual leakage that will happen over the project area and in the area. But for smaller size projects, it's pretty binary. It's 0 or 5% for the moment.
So I do have a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
People obviously compare this to Vera and their Abacus program. Abacus's leakage is pretty severe. It's like 100% for certain types of activity displacements, which is, it's good. We like to see conservativeness. Again, I think it comes down to scale, a lot of it, but
So a related question that we've gotten is OFP appropriate for large projects? How would you take that?
Yes, it's totally appropriate. I would say we started by onboarding smaller, medium-sized projects, because this was also the community that we really wanted to include in the carbon markets, because they were completely excluded. But of course, OFP's methodology is scalable and available also for larger scale projects. The largest we're currently working with are about like 5,000 hectares. So that's like, of course, it's not 100,000 for the moment, but it's still like more large scale projects that could also be onboarded on Vera. But I would say like pretty flexible, available for medium, small, and large scale projects.
Yeah, I think in the large scale, well, for any project, it takes a village, so to speak. One thing that we found, and we know from the research that local involvement is key to long-term project success. It is a requisite, it's a requirement for Open Forest Protocol to have that sort of involvement, particularly in a larger scale project. Imagine you have dozens or even hundreds of points that need to be monitored from a ground truthing perspective on a regular basis. You will have to employ significant numbers from the local community. The nice thing is we've seen this work in contexts where people have limited technological knowledge, simply access to a smartphone. They can complete the data collection and do so well enough such that the project ultimately gets validated. One quick example from the field, another project, I think it's actually in Tanzania as well. They had been sending their people out into the fields to do the data collection, and they were able to find, unfortunately, or depending how you look at it, signs of poaching. All the evidence was there. They wouldn't otherwise have known that the poaching was happening on their land had they not been going out and getting involved and really, again, putting their hands on the trees and doing the measurements. So again, that local involvement can be really, really good for long-term sustainability and monitoring and understanding what's truly happening on your project under the canopy.
A lot of the other questions that we're getting are financial in nature or have to do with how people can buy OFP credits. So what does the process look like for someone who's interested in buying OFP credits?
I can take this one.
Yeah, you were
yeah, so Open Forest Protocol is, right now we have a few credits that have been generated. We've had our methodology live for just over a year. It takes a year for a project to be even eligible to generate credits. So we have our first few that are generated, currently held in the wallets of those projects. Right now, the process will essentially be a hybrid of an on-chain transaction to move the carbon credits and an off-chain transaction for the money. The next phase of product building on our side will be to bring all of that on-chain such that we have really a seamless process to move value one way, credits another way, ensure there's sort of an escrow agent in the middle that's required to make a trusted transaction happen. And so it wouldn't look that different than, say, going onto eBay. People still do that these days. Maybe I'm dating myself, but going onto eBay and buying, a rug or a pair of shoes, right? It's a transaction using a trusted platform between two parties, and that's really what we're going for. Again, to abstract away any of the blockchain aspects of it, which I think we've done. The nice thing is once those credits move, again, you've got a transaction of where those credits came from, where they went to. If there's money moving on chain, you can see pricing. So you have this nice price discovery element that lends nice data to the VCM in general. So you can see what credits have been trading at over time for different types of projects on Open Forest Protocol. And ultimately within our wallet, we have an on-chain retirement feature as well. And an on-chain retirement is very, very final. Essentially that digital asset, the unique identification number on the blockchain, is no more. It essentially is burned is the term, meaning it can't move out of that wallet ever again. In its place gets created a certificate so that the retiree can show people, yes, in this year we retired this many credits. Here's where they came from. Here's what they looked like. You can trace that right back to the project, but they can't potentially resell those at a future date.
Great. Is OFP in the process of being evaluated for approval by the ICVCM?
It's on our plate, yes. It's one of the next steps that we need to go through. So now that we have issued the first credits, this is something that we're planning. So either ICRA or ICBCM will be the one we will go for.
Excellent. We have a few more technical questions here. We do have 10 minutes left, so I am going to kick this back to you, Elias. Elias, you have a lot of people informing you that Verra and Gold Standard both require a 10-year period between deforestation and beginning a project.
That is incorrect.
Yeah, explain the difference. Why?
So
Why
read VM 47 very closely, and you'll notice that this criteria only applies to projects that use the census-based protocol. Renoster has reviewed a number of ARR projects under both standards that are taking place on forest on land that was tropical, that was rainforest before they planted the trees. We've also reviewed, for pre-project diligence, like projects that are currently enrolling that are under the impression that this is the case, and they're currently enrolling land that was deforested. Now, I will admit this is a really complicated issue, because if you read VM 47, it's not entirely clear. There's a page break. It's not clear whether or not the thing applies for just the census-based or the area-based. But this hasn't been made clear by Verra. Gold Standard, they've updated their methodologies a bit, but there's a bunch of Gold Standard projects that do take place on land that was historically, and they've historically allowed it to take place as long as there was a change of ownership, which I don't think is sufficient to really quell that concern that people could cut down rainforest and then resell the land for trees. But yeah, I mean, we've got lots of pictures on our websites of before and after shots of Verra projects that are native rainforest and now are eucalyptus plantations. So at the very least, Verra needs to clarify if they meant for that criteria to apply to the entire standard and not just the census-based part of VM 47. Anyway, this is getting way into the weeds here.
It is, but I do want to be, it seems like folks do want some clarification here around, how is OFP different? So how does OFP ensure that it, is it just remote sensing analysis basically?
Yes, it's basically remote sensing analysis of the past land use, deforestation analysis, like what can be done pretty easily. And if we have any doubts, we also reach out to the project to prove any changes in land use basically. But most of the time, the remote sensing in the past 10 years is pretty obvious. And I think Elias can approve this. There's no difficulty in seeing if a forest has been deforested over time in the past 10 years, at least.
Yeah, we've got satellite imagery on basically a monthly basis going back far more than 10 years. So it's a fairly easy thing to actually validate. And that's why we have seen a bunch of these projects that have done this. So we can see it.
We do have a question about the appropriate level of assurance. Are there standards to which the validations are being performed, to which the expert reviews are being performed? And I think we've kind of covered that creating this multiple validator structure creates a race to the top as opposed to a race to the bottom, where folks are really want to catch things that maybe other organizations missed. Is that kind of your thinking there, or do you plan to have some sort of standard of review? Arlene or Jeremy, either one.
Yeah, so for the moment, I would say, as Jeremy was saying, the more biodiverse as an ecosystem of validators we can have, the better. So we have forest experts, we have remote sensing companies, and the data that is collected on the ground is collected in a way that's very standardized. So if you're a validator, if you have some expertise in data analysis, it's not complex for you to analyze over time what has happened in the project area. It's extremely simple. It's data points. You can compare in your dashboard. You can see, okay, this is 1 year ago. This is 3 years ago. This is 4 years ago. This is how the trees have grown. You have the pictures. You check the pictures. You have the photos of the circumference of the tree that's being measured and so on. So I would say the validators are trained to identify bad data. So they have some guidelines on how to validate, but we're not enforcing them and checking them. What we're checking is their rate of success. Are there like what's the rate of success of the validators? Are they voting on the right outcomes, or is the rate of success below a certain threshold? So this we're able to track and to identify if some validators are not performing in the way they should, and then we can reach out to them or like say, okay, you're not at the level that we want. Like, sorry, like you'll need to be excluded from the system. So it's kind of it's a moving piece where like skills come up. We group these skills, these different skills, they evaluate the projects, and we can track how the validations are going on. So yeah, with best practices are evolving since the beginning. We have, of course, like improved the data collection. We've improved like how validators are evaluating the data and so on. But I think it's been working quite well right now. We have some projects that have been denied by the validators, of course, because the data was not deemed as legitimate. So yeah, we'll improve over time. Also, we'll improve with the additional technologies that will be available. So it's, yeah, I would say it's a moving piece.
Based on what I've seen in the VCM, not having to rely on a single auditor from a single company to sign off that something was done to a certain standard and just take their word for it is really like truly an unprecedented advance and transparency here. So Elias and I, or at least I applaud you for that. And I know Elias was also excited about that. Elias, we have 4 minutes here, and Robert too, if there are any final thoughts that you have around, you know, how you're excited to work with OFP in the future, or what, you know, if you had to identify a single thing here that would mean the most to a credit buyer, what would you say? Yeah, I'll let Elias go first. Sorry, I wasn't very clear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the attempts at addressing the conflicts of interest and the kind of the rigor behind the protocol is what excites me the most. I think that it's kind of a bold attempt to do things a lot differently than most others have so far, and it kind of really gets to the heart of some of the criticisms that have been kind of leveled by myself and reporters and whatnot about like the voluntary carbon markets.
What about you, Robert? What are your kind of hopes for working with OFP and what you're excited about?
Actually, I completely wholeheartedly agree with what Elias has said. It's indeed a very bold move to create a platform such as this that is so rigorous, which on one hand is of course essential. But still, I think the point that I think is probably the most exciting, really is the cost effectiveness and the scalability of it, and also that smaller project sizes are all of a sudden eligible to be rewarded for their efforts. And I think this mobilization of smallholder farmers, potentially for regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, or even just ARR projects in general, it doesn't really matter anymore what kind of size that you're looking at, but any and all impact that can be made can now be made through the open forest protocol methodology. And I think that's really a breath of fresh air, because carbon credits, carbon trading, and so on, of course, are humongous buzzwords these days. But the kind of projects that are being churned out, and also the scale of them, and also with all complications that come with it, that all of a sudden also paints a bit of an unfortunate picture for some kinds of carbon projects. And I think that is completely unnecessary if you, for example, have a methodology which is as rigorous as this one. So I think, this is also, or what I find to be super exciting is, and if I were in the shoes of a Vera Gold Standard, I'd really want to rethink the way that they have designed the methodologies, and I would say also just follow suit.
Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap up right on time here. Thank you all for your expertise and your time today. This has been great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks viewers for coming and all your questions, and to our speakers for their knowledge and perspectives. We'll share out the recording from this webinar afterwards. So if you have, anybody else on your team, or if you'd like to review and dig in further, you'll have that resource. But we look forward to seeing you at future ones. Everyone has a great day. Thanks everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone. Ciao.